I'm Jake,
And I'm Cam.
and we have issues.
So today's issue is Spriggan, and the story is written by Hiroshi Takashige, and the art is by Ryouji Minagawa. And why don't we start off, first of all, by talking about what this manga is all about, and move on from there. Does that sound all right?
Sure.
Okay, so the original print run of this particular series was kind of the late 80s, so it was about 1989, and its run was all the way up to 1996, and this was a, believe it or not, a shonen title because I mean we'll talk about how we were introduced to this series in a little bit, but it was serialized in Shonen Sunday and Shonen Zokan, respectively. And when it came to the US or to the English speaking world, it was published by Viz Media originally, and it came under the name Striker. So, I mean, Jake, you're stateside, I'm in the UK, and we never got Spriggan in the US. Do you remember Striker as it was released in the late 90s?
No, I actually never picked this up. Um, like when I was stateside back in the 90s.
Hmm.
Before I went to Japan in 98.
Yeah.
Um, I think I had gotten the original Japanese volumes when I lived in Japan.
Yeah.
Maybe the first few, five or so.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I had probably gotten those because I could get them really cheaply. Um, in Japan they have like used bookstores where you could get Japanese manga pretty cheap. So I was like, oh, I'll pick this up. This had piqued my curiosity when I was younger, I thought, and I was like, okay, I'll pick that up.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So it came out in the US, sort of was published, as I said, by Viz Media in the late 90s, and it didn't even run in its entirety. But now, as of last year, 2022, Seven Seas publishing house in the US released it in the entire manga series in four omnibus editions, and those are the editions I'm using for this review or this overview. And so this is, for example, this is the first volume here, which
Hmm.
are quite nice actually. They're meaty omnibus editions. They're very well printed, and I'm happy to have all four of these. So that's what I'll be using as my point of
Or there
reference.
are four volumes of these.
There are four, yeah, and each one is as I said, pretty beefy. So as you can see from the spine
Ah,
here,
okay.
but yeah, they're very well put together. But for the purpose of this episode, this issue, we're going to be talking about chapters 1 to 5, which covers the first two stories in the series. It's a very for anybody who has never heard of Spriggan, the manga, it's written in a very episodic format. So we're looking at the first two, if you like, the first two stories. Well, the first from the editions that I'm reading from, which I'm assuming is accurate in how the Shonen Jump series was originally published. First mission is the first chapter, and then from chapter 2 to 5 is Serpent of Flames. So I'll just go over a quick overview of what Spriggan is all about. So the story takes place during the last few years of the Cold War, and basically a corporation called Arkham are tasked with locating and saving mysterious and unknown artifacts. That are basically referred to as out of place artifacts. And what they are really a selection of different sort of mythological and ancient artifacts from lots of different mythology or religions. And as a result of that, other governments are after these artifacts because they hold so-called powers, and are potentially weapons that can be used to gain the upper hand in this sort of a secret underground war that Arkham, which is where the main character, who the main character works for, um, are basically involved in. So it's basically, imagine a sort of an underground uh, syndicate of these companies and these organizations that work under governments that are tasked with locating these mysterious artifacts. And
Like a cross between like a secret organization that's at odds with other secret organizations like the CIA and the KGB, which we'll see in these two chapters.
yeah, and I mean, so the main character is a high school student. So this is a shonen, and originally I didn't know this was a shonen when I discovered it in the very late '90s, and I thought it was I thought it was a seinen. I thought it was aimed at sort of an older audience, which is kind of strange because it can be quite violent. In places, but it is a shonen. So the main character, he's called Ominai Yu, and he is a high school student, and he basically lives a double life. So on the one hand, he's a student, and undercover, he's this super soldier, a Spriggan. And so I guess with that out the way, and as I said, the stories are framed in these kind of missions, or these side stories. There is a loose overarching storyline, but that you only really catch wind of that much later on in the series. So um, within the 5 chapters that we looked at, which are the first two main stories, you don't really get an idea of a larger story within this world. But that's not for us to discuss here. One thing I will say is that I discovered. I'm going to ask you this question as well. How did we discover Spriggan in the first place? And for me, it was shortly after when I saw Akira for the first time on VHS. This is Manga Films released it in the UK. Um, there was a trailer for Spriggan, the movie, and the movie was, I think it was released in 1998. And I never got to see the film, but I remember thinking, oh wow, this looks like so cool. It's like kind of a cross between Indiana Jones and sort of super soldiers, and it's just, at the time, obviously it was a really cool concept. I hadn't really seen anything like it, and to be honest, I still haven't, in its particular sort of mix of these two different genres. Um, and I didn't get to see the film. I really wanted to, but I saw it recently over lockdown, like in 2020.
I had really enjoyed watching Akira. It was one of those when I was in high school, it was a film that really just changed my outlook on um just Japanese pop culture. And anything that Katsuhiro Otomo was involved in, the creator of Akira, I kind of took an interest in. And so I know that there was an anime. I probably saw it before I even read
Yeah,
the manga.
yeah, absolutely. And I remember, um, ever since I found out that it was based on a manga, which was actually not that long ago. As I said, I saw the movie in its entirety about 2 years ago, and when I saw it, I only then realized that it was based on a manga series, and I didn't even know it was a shonen. And I always thought, oh, it'd be cool to actually read this manga. And then it just so happens that last year, Seven Seas decided to they got the rights for the entire manga series, and then I thought, oh, this is the perfect time to get into it.
The with the protagonist being an actual student by day and not getting any sleep. It's kind of a semi-classic um trope. It's kind of like he's a superhero by night, you know, and he's a high school student by day. And then there's also a lot of shonen types of um ideas as far as like the women whom he meets. in his night job are also people that he's known from before, or are also high school students. So there's that. It makes it a kind of it makes it a kind of formula, and this might be the start of that formula, or one of the starts of that formula, wherein it's like, oh yeah, he's got a secret identity. But it's also been something that, Spider-Man and Peter Parker have done for years and years before this. um but it's fun. I mean, it's fun. I could see myself as probably like a Chugakse or a Kokose, like a junior high or high school student in Japan reading this, I'll just pick it up on Sunday and kind of say like, hey, I gotta escape this, study drudgery, and this thing is gonna just lift my spirits, and it probably did, because you're just talking about a whole bunch of stuff like, wrath of God type
Yeah.
type stuff. And that's really cool. And then kind of tying it in also not only to like
Yeah.
the to like Western religion, but Eastern religion in the second story, when you're talking about like Shinto shrines and the possibility of controlling
Mm.
volcanoes. It's great. I mean, it's fun to read. It's the story is fun.
And I agree with you. It's a lot of fun. When I first read the first chapter, first mission, I thought this is ridiculous. This is like, especially learning that Ominai is a high school student. I thought, oh, here we go. It's going to be like really cookie cutter and just a little bit cheesy. But I really enjoyed it. I thought the fact that the fact that it's so outrageous, and just so ridiculous in the fact that, um, as you said, he lives this double life, and he has, he's basically a super soldier, outside of school. And yeah, it is very much, aimed at a particular demographic, especially for the time it was written, sort of late 80s, early 90s. And so yeah, it fits the bill as long as you know what you're going in, you're going into, and you can't really take it seriously. It does. I don't think it even takes itself seriously. I think it's very much aware of the conceit and how silly it can be. But I think it does a really good job of balancing the sort of occult stroke, sort of supernatural and mythological elements with the super soldier. I want to say framing in that, you get these sort of the mythological side of things, where, as you said, there's, the shrines in the second story, which was the Serpent of Flames in the Seven Seas release.
Yeah, the special metal that's unbreakable
Oh yeah,
pretty
because he
much, that was
uses
left to
it.
them with a message that says, hey, you gotta, like, previous civilizations have destroyed themselves, you've got to look after like this technology, or you all are probably gonna get it. Which, well,
Yeah,
yeah, it's intriguing when you're just like, oh, okay, so then this entire secret organization's up has
yeah.
been put up to kind of, protect these artifacts. It would be kind of neat for me to read the rest of the
Mm,
story and see like, oh, okay, so where's this going?
yeah.
It makes you want to read it.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. The only thing is, right, for me, it can be a bit formulaic. So I've read beyond chapter 5, and I've sort of gone on to the second omnibus. And after a while, it does get quite formulaic in how the setup is. For example, Omenai has to work with a, a female uh, protagonist as well. Um, and there's a new one in every single story. And it kind of has this very rinse and repeat in terms of he has to fight against another sort of super soldier who's sort of in his way to finding this artifact, and so on and so forth. But having said that, it's written in such a way that it's so much fun. I suppose you can sort of, it's one of those palate cleansers for when you read something really deep and heavy.
You're kind of going like, okay, here's the mission. You go through the mission. You're fighting the
Yeah,
little toadstools,
yeah,
and then you get to like the boss battle at
yeah,
the end. He's got that special
yeah,
thing that you've got to try to figure out. Um,
Oh yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know. I was just watching like Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla for the very first time, like with my son the other day. They have such a
Yeah.
fascination with like artifacts and finding the correct artifacts and how it affects the earth and how it affects like the nature and the weather and things like that in that movie that it even that even kind of comes to this story. You know, I think there's a certain mentality in Japan where you're just like, yeah, there's these things that can our we live in a land that is so precarious, you know, where earthquakes or typhoons or anything can kind of destroy us. So there's that reflects kind of like the cultural dreamscape in a way.
That's interesting you brought that up actually, because there's a lot of there's a lot of reference to environmental factors and sort of how how these artifacts came to being on Earth. The character writing is pretty. I mean, it is very much a one-trick pony in that. I don't mean that. That sounds negative, but I don't want to say it's not. It's bad in any sense. It's just that um, Ominayu, the main character, the main Spriggan, uh, he's not the most in depthly written character, is he? In my opinion, anyway. He's sort of he's this brash, sort of carefree student, but at the same time, he's he kind of has
Yeah, I
this
think
happy-go-lucky attitude when he's on
well,
missions, and
actually, okay, I can act kind of dumb, but at the same time, he actually has like lots
yeah,
of knowledge, you know, and that's kind of a it's one of those
yeah,
things where it's a heroic conceit, wherein oh yeah, he acts like a dumbass, but then actually he's pretty smart, especially if he
mm,
has to outsmart these guys, you know. Um, but actually, I'd have to say that the story, still talking about the story, even with the little wrenches that the writer puts in and all the ways that he kind of thinks of to kind of outsmart his opponents, or even the little the little
yeah,
the little things that happen that help him, like even in the first story, like the female lead actually helps him to beat the bad guy. So he's not perfect as a character, and he could definitely use some help. It's just that um I think that's generally what a character that you would see in a shonen manga would be.
yeah. I mean, yeah, it is very stereotypical in that it's shonen to the max, but I still like the character. He's fun. He's a fun protagonist, and the other supporting cast are pretty fun as well. You meet some
Sure.
of them later on. You don't really in the first two stories that we looked at, but yeah. But I mean, I suppose the formulaic nature of the stories. I think Takashige Sensei was going for that in the first place. As you say, it's very intentional, and it's a lot of fun.
The manga the art style in Spriggan itself is very sketchy, very dark. I don't know if it kind of evolves later on in the next few volumes. Um it's not like it's not like Otomo's really clean cut lines and really ornate architecture and technology. A lot of it really is character focused, wherein you could see that the shots are basically just showing
Mm,
us how the characters react, right? And then if it's not focused on the characters, it's focused on action. It's like it's a very action based manga.
yeah.
Like a lot of it is fight scenes. A lot of it is
Mm,
not there's not a lot of establishing shots.
yeah.
A lot of it is like, okay, wait, I'm going through a building and then I get to fight the boss, or
Mm,
I'm going through a forest and then I get to fight the boss. That's
yeah.
not to say that the art is
Yeah.
spectacular when it comes to the boss to the fights. Um, it really is spectacular, and you kind of get drawn in by the spectacular violence that is in these in the art. Um, but I I I don't want to say it's not refined. It's refined for the type of story it's telling, but look at when I look at some of the manga that was prevalent back then or was popular back then, like of course Otomo's Akira um or Shiro Masamune's Appleseed or Ghost in the Shell or even stuff by Rumiko Takahashi if you go into a different genre. It's very sketchy, it's very stylized to depict um action, I would say.
Yeah, and this being this being a manga that was written in the late 80s and into the 90s, it's very evocative of those types of series in the art. It's very action driven. It's so I would say that Minagawa Sensei has a great knack for illustrating the action scenes because they are very dynamic. They're well choreographed. I do think it's a little bit rough in some of the opening chapters, but
Yes,
it
you're right.
does get progressively better. And when it does get good, it gets very good. So you know what I mean? Like some, it's not. I think I totally agree with you. It's very much about focusing on the immediate action as opposed to the environments and the architecture.
There's these soldiers that are getting punched into trucks. I love that stuff. It's, I mean, what? How could that not draw you in? And then
Oh
later
yeah,
on, they get
yeah, yeah,
sliced
yeah,
up.
yeah. Yeah, but that
Oh man.
but I mean like just showing a panel here of Omni here.
Hmm.
Get that into the frame. Um, there's some very cool shots here. Some very cool panels.
I love it when I can see the
Mm,
art style of a manga
yeah,
evolve into something
yeah,
when they're kind of getting into their groove, when the artist kind of has either more time or more money to hire assistants to do the stuff.
yeah. No, absolutely. So I'm assuming it only gets better. I'm currently reading through volume 2 of the omnibuses, but yeah, you can definitely see a progression. But that tends to be the case with a lot of long running manga series. They tend to start off with an idea with a general flow in terms of the art, and then it gets progressively more competent or more confident as the artist, chapter by chapter,
Mm-hmm.
as it gets better. Basically, it just does. It's that natural process, isn't it? Um,
Um, Sometimes I try to
yeah.
imagine what it would be like if somebody else was illustrating this, how it would be. But then, like for example, the nearest artist that I could think
Okay.
of, Masamune Shiro. And the style it's probably close to is his early work on Black Magic. I would say the refinement of Shiro is kind of like the best thing to see as an evolution. I would like to see I would like to see the um Minagawa Sensei's
Mhm.
evolution as an artist by reading his later works as well. He worked on Heaven before this, and so Spriggan's actually his second manga, so it's actually some of his early work. Then he went to do Spriggan's from 91 to 96. Heaven was his first one in 1988.
Okay.
Kyo in 1996. Project Arms from 1997. D Live, Soul, Intruder, Peacemaker, and Adamas are some of his manga work. Sure.
So I'm going to give you my closing thoughts on Spriggan, and then I'll invite you to do the same. So for me, I thought this was a really fun read. Like I really enjoyed this book, and I am continuing to enjoy it. So I do recommend you read on because it gets better. Um, there are in these two stories that we both looked at, there's some really cool setups in terms of the action, in terms of the storytelling, even if it isn't the most complex story. But that's not the point. It is meant to be a really kind of ridiculous, over the top story about super soldiers and, sort of mystical treasure hunts, which is sort of what they do throughout the story. And I had a lot of fun with it. I thought the art was really cool, because it's just I know what to expect from story to story because it has a very predictable formula, but it's a heck of a lot of fun, and that to me is testament to how good how well all of these ingredients come together.
Like I said, I didn't find it memorable like from before, but now that we've done a podcast on it, I think I'm gonna find it pretty memorable. Um, and just commenting on the just us kind of doing this fun analysis of it makes me realize how fun it is and how nice this must have been like for people to read back in the day, especially when it first came out and you didn't have anything kind of like this. Um, this
Mm.
is this is one of those
Yeah,
things wherein the writer and the artist as magpies have taken different ideas from different places and made it a coherent work that actually is fun to read. Um, to me, it's not the most it, it it's
yeah,
definitely not like a
yeah.
deep read. It's not the most refined thing, but it takes you out of your everyday, and
Yeah,
for that
definitely.
it does its job. And yes, I can recommend it for that.
And I totally agree with you. It is escapism, pure escapism. It is a little bit rough around the edges, but in many ways it's better for it. Yeah, like super powerful sort of mech armor suits and yeah, just a lot of ridiculous villains.
I'm just giggly from having read it. I'm just like, it is neat. I want to read more of it. It's nice. I can if you say it's comfort
Yeah,
food, I will have more of this comfort food.
I'm looking forward to reading more of it as well. So thanks everyone for watching, and we will see you in the next episode. So take care.